Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description.
Joining us now is Pisco. He is the host of Pisco's Hour. For our purposes, he's actually an attorney, and he's got a lot of specialization in immigration. He's been doing a decent job. He joined us before. He did a great job of breaking down those legal developments, and we have even more legal developments here, specifically involving the Supreme Court. So guys, let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. This came over the weekend where it was an extraordinary order from the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court blocking the Trump administration from deporting foreign nationals under the Alien Enemies Act. So Pisco, go ahead and describe this order, how many justices were for, how many were against, the timing of which it came out, because there was a lot of legal analysis going over the entire breadth of the decision. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So this is an extraordinary order. The ACLU went to the district court, went to the appellate court, the Fifth Circuit, and then also to the Supreme Court almost concurrently, within hours of each other, because there was news that the Trump administration was moving quickly to deport tons of alleged alien enemies. If you remember the last time we spoke, there was that ruling and holding that even alleged alien enemies are entitled to due process and to have habeas petitions. Well, as I predicted and as we talked about, they were going to interpret what reasonable notice meant. And according to the ACLU, that meant 24 hours. And you had to sort of signal that you were going to file a habeas petition. And so in an extraordinary order, the Supreme Court at like 1 o'clock in the morning ordered, quote, the government to stop and pause any deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. It was, right now there's only 2 noted dissents. We don't know for sure that all the other 7 were in favor, but there were no other noted dissents. So people are assuming now that there was a 7-2 holding to pause all Alien Enemies Act deportations in a certain part of Texas.
Okay. So let's put up A2. Speaking of these dissents, this is Sam Alito. He writes, in sum, literally in the middle of the night, the court issued unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule, without hearing from the opposing party, within 8 hours of receiving the application, with dubious factual support for its order, and without providing any explanation for its order, refused to join the court's order because we had no good reason to think that under the circumstances, issuing an order at midnight was necessary or appropriate. Both the executive and the judiciary have an obligation to follow the law. Now, at the same time, you had a rather dramatic circuit court hearing with the judge there that the Trump administration kind of despises, where you had the attorneys for the migrants saying, we are hearing that people are being ordered to change clothes right now. Like, we can smell the fumes of the buses that are going to take these men to the airport. Please, sir, please, Your Honor, you have to act now. And he refused to step in, saying that he didn't have the jurisdiction at the time to inject himself into the controversy. But the Supreme Court did then just hours later. So can you talk about Alito's claim here that there actually is no urgency and that they shouldn't have done that? Where were the people in question at this moment?
Yeah, by all accounts, the reporting is they were on buses ready to go to the airport, and they were getting ready to take off. Now, I think you're referencing a hearing with Judge Boasberg, and in that case, it's in a different jurisdiction. Boasberg is pretty much saying, my hands are tied. The Supreme Court said, the right venue for these habeas petitions has to be in the place where the confinement, was at the time the habeas petition was filed. And so I actually don't blame Boasberg at all. He was just, holding on to that ruling from the Supreme Court earlier.
Does this apply to his people as well, because it covers all class of people under the Alien Enemies Act?
It covers only people in Texas, the Supreme Court's order itself. And but Boasberg is saying, listen, I don't have jurisdiction here. I have to listen to the Supreme Court. So that makes sense. As for Alito's concerns, in ordinary circumstances, Alito would be right. You're supposed to go through the ordinary process of appeal. You're supposed to, make sure that you're exhausting your remedies at the district court and then at the Circuit Court of Appeals. Here's the problem. Nobody believes the government when they say, hey, we're not going to deport these people. Oftentimes, they're not even able to make those representations in court. Oftentimes, they lie. They're already lying about the decision. They say that it was 9-0 in their favor, the previous decision for Kilmar Abrego Garcia. And so you can tell the Supreme Court, they're a little spooked, I think, that those 7 justices. They don't trust the administration. And so when Alito says there's no factual basis to believe that these people are about to be deported, he's taking the government at their word. And what the government has shown is you shouldn't.
So I think that's actually the most interesting part about the late night decision is it was clearly the Supreme Court trying to assert its jurisdiction and its orders after watching the Trump administration and the way they have handled a lot of the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. Speaking of which, there have been some extraordinary developments on that over the weekend as well. We had a couple of instances. Ryan and Emily did a good job on Friday of breaking down the meeting between Senator Chris Van Hollen and Abrego Garcia that took place in El Salvador. But what actually came following that announcement was interesting as well. A continued claim from the Trump administration that Abrego Garcia was a confirmed member of MS-13. We have a little bit here from Abrego Garcia's lawyer being asked specifically about tattoos that allegedly show his MS-13 membership on his hands. And then I want to get your reaction afterwards. Let's take a listen to his lawyer.
One thing that we've heard from the legal team and against this allegation from the White House is about his history. I know that you've said he doesn't have a criminal history, that he had never been arrested for anything before. People at the White House have pointed out to me, they say that doesn't mean that he wasn't a member of MS-13. There's not always criminal activity on someone's record if they are in a gang. And I want to show you something that the president posted tonight. It's a photo of what he says is your client's left hand. You can see his knuckles there, and the president is showing these tattoos that the White House alleges.
Break down what's going on there in terms of the claim. I know that you've looked and actually read a lot of the docket. There's a lot of conservative influencers, will be like a confirmed member of MS-13. Break it all down for the audience here.
Yeah. So first of all, it's important to note that it doesn't matter even if you were an MS-13 member. Even the worst criminals in the country deserve due process, and none of the Supreme Court's holdings related to due process, rely on whether or not you're a member of MS-13 or not. But to actually address the claim, they're basing it on a sort of police report that existed in 2019, where a cop who was later sort of suspended for behavior that's, frankly, I don't know if I would say corrupt, but certainly bad behavior, where he was having sex with a prostitute that he was also feeding, confidential information to. And this cop, on the basis of really just hearsay, someone said he's a member of MS-13 and he's wearing like Chicago Bulls clothing. They alleged that he was a member of MS-13. And so that claim got sort of funneled into the immigration court.
And alleged hearsay, do we even know that this person exists?
We don't know who this person's name is. We don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Right. So the holdings of the immigration courts were with respect to a bond hearing. Okay, a bond hearing is a very different threshold than a finding of fact, and if there's some issue, some legal issue that needs to be fettered out by the court. Imagine it, right? Imagine if in a bond hearing you were accused of murder or something, and the court found probable cause to hold you, or just to hold you, right? Just the amount of evidence it would take for them to keep you in a cage until there is the process, right? You don't have any right to cross-examine this person. There was no availability of this officer to be cross-examined, and so it is the height, I think, of a propagandist to suggest that these rulings related to the bond hearing, are actual findings of fact that he's a member of MS-13, and all the evidence is to the contrary, in my opinion. No criminal record here, no criminal record in El Salvador. Those tattoos. It's like the Glenn Beck. You guys ever see the Glenn Beck board where they're just like connecting dots, and they're saying that the marijuana leaf represents M, the smiley face represents S, and so they're just trying to make connections there.
And you can do it with anyone's tattoos. I don't know how much you know about MS-13, but if people look up the tattoos that MS-13 gang members wear, they will write MS-13 like across their face. It's blaring it, underlining it, circling it all across their back. MS-13, they are not a shy gang. Like they're not like a 14-year-old who's trying to get like something past their parents or their teacher, like ha ha ha, I got a little marijuana leaf, but it actually means the M in MS-13. Like they blare it out. You get kicked out of the gang if you're like, wait a minute, are you in MS-13 or not? Like, what is this weak
Noted
stuff?
MS-13 expert Ryan.
Exactly.
Yeah, go ahead, Pisco.
No, but you read the tattoo analysis documents that they're giving to some of these ICE officers, and there's one tattoo I remember. It said "Real hasta la muerte," which means Real Madrid until death. But people take that to be like a gang tattoo. Mm-hmm. It's just absurd the lengths they'll go to, and even with some of these other cases that are not seen as much coverage. I think simply because this Kilmar Abrego Garcia case is so preposterous and so unlawful. But there are other cases where we know, like it's a autism tattoo or it's a tattoo that says mom or dad, and so nobody trusts these tattoo experts. And when they actually go to court, some of these habeas petitions have been brought in court. In at least one instance, the court has asked the government, "Hey, what's your evidence that this person is a gang member and an alien enemy?" And they have literally put up nothing, zero. Like not even just saying like the bad evidence that they have here, the doctored photo or whatever. They have put up no evidence, and so this is really disturbing. And we shouldn't trust the government's representations as to Kilmar or as to any of these alleged alien enemies.
So
Also,
to that, go ahead.
Just real quickly, I've seen real tattoo people say the most logical explanation for it would be weed makes me happy, so Saagar would like to see him deported
true.
just for that. Weed makes me happy. Faith in the Lord till I die. Like Lord till I die.
Or what if
like,
it's faith in weed, which is even worse? All right, let's get to
Saagar's
make
like,
it serious.
All right, give him a second
To
chance.
make it serious.
Yes.
To make it serious. Let's turn to Tom Homan.
You
the
said we're going to be
immigration
serious.
czar. Yeah, Ryan's still on his high from 420. That's what's going on here. All right, let's get to Tom Homan. He's the immigration czar, and he's asked specifically about this tattoo identification process. Let's take a listen.
But no one's removed just because of a tattoo.
In other words, the Alien Entity Act means you can grab somebody and you can deport them without an extended hearing because you have labeled them a terrorist. Because you've said you've determined that somebody is a member of the gang, and therefore they don't have to go through the extended process of the opportunity to have a full hearing. That's what you're saying. And let's just be clear.
I'm saying we're following the laws of this country, and there's a different procedure for each one. We're doing things within the frame of the law. We're doing things legally.
Okay.
I stand by that. Now, again, I'm not a constitutional scholar. I'm not going to argue this in court. That's what the Department of Justice does. But I'm sitting here today thinking we've done the right thing for this nation, following the laws and the Constitution of this country.
So what do you get from that about not only the defense of the Alien Enemies Act, the tattoo justification, and more? What do you think?
Yeah, this guy's a depraved individual. He has no idea what the law is, and they're in open defiance of the Supreme Court. They're claiming that they only have to give 24 hours notice to people, and that constitutes reasonable notice for some of these people who don't even speak English to file habeas petitions. They know they're flouting the Supreme Court. That's one ruling, right? That's the ruling related to the Alien Enemies Act that you deserve a habeas petition. That's one ruling that they're violating. The second ruling that they're violating is they're still not facilitating the release from custody in El Salvador of Kilmar, and now apparently he's been moved around multiple times. So on the one hand, what I get from that is open defiance, and the people who's most in charge of the quote unquote border or enforcement doesn't even know the bare bones of their enforcement policy, isn't able to speak about it intelligently in a conversation. And in general, I think this entire endeavor has been characterized by unlawfulness and illegality. So his pretense that they've been doing everything to follow the law, I think, is just absurd.
On the moving around part, that was one where I was very confused as well. So Senator Chris Van Hollen, who met with Garcia, broke down some of the things he learned, not only about Garcia, but also about the arrangement between the United States and El Salvador. Let's take a listen to that, and I want your reaction as well.
The Trump administration has promised to pay El Salvador $15 million to detain these prisoners, including the illegally abducted Kilmar.
I want to say something about the government of El Salvador. They are making a huge mistake. You know, they want to brand themselves as a country for technology. The president said, Bitcoin is legal tender. But now what they're branding themselves as the place for these huge prisons where people who are illegally abducted are warehoused. There may be states that decide they don't want any of their pension funds invested in companies that invest in a place like El Salvador.
So that was an interesting kind of breakdown. He talked about how there's a $9 million arrangement between the United States and El Salvador about this movement of prisons. What does that, beyond the interest in that, in his particular circumstances, what does that mean for this legal arrangement? That's what a lot of people are trying to get their heads around, both in the facilitation, in terms of ever being able to bring him back, even if he were to be deported. Again, can you break some of that down for us?
Yeah, I think legally what is relevant about that is for purposes of the concern regarding the Article 2 encroachment of the court. So you'll remember and recall there was this big discussion about, well, what can the Article 2 district court, or sorry, Article 3 district court order the administration to actually do? Does facilitate mean I get to order the Trump administration to invade El Salvador? Surely it can't mean that. And so for purposes of that analysis, I think the fact that there is a payment relationship there makes this much more like a contracting situation. And I think everyone would agree, right? Imagine that Guantanamo Bay were being outsourced, oversight over Guantanamo Bay were being outsourced to a private corporation, or even like a foreign country operating in Guantanamo Bay, that the nature of the payment structure there sort of informs the court who actually has the authority, right? If he's in constructive custody of the United States, regardless of whether or not the prison guards themselves are Americans, that's a very different situation than Brittany Griner when she's imprisoned by the Russian Federation. And so I think those are all things that the court is going to take into consideration there. And I think it is legally relevant.
Okay. Ryan, you got anything else?
No,
All right.
covers it.
Well, I have a question for you, Saagar.
Sure. Saagar, but yeah, go ahead.
Oh, my bad, Saagar. My apologies. Isn't this condemnable? Didn't the Trump administration do the wrong thing here?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that the way this has been handled has been really a disaster. And I think, the interesting thing, I've said this to Crystal, I said to Glenn as well, like my initial reaction, to the entire case was a baseline trust in not even trust per se, but just in basic competence that I didn't expect that you could actually be in a world where you would be not only about Abrego Garcia being mistakenly deported, but where, the United States criminal justice system validates gang members in the Bureau of Prisons literally every day. So you would think that there is some baseline assumption around how to classify people as a gang member. Let's say you have 8 to 10 million illegals who enter the country under Biden. That's a conservative estimate. And it's like, okay, it's reasonably and it's a reasonable assumption, I think, to say that 250 or so, they say that they're the worst of the worst. I actually, I approach that from a position of like, sounds relatively reasonable. And then to see the way that these claims have all fallen apart in court, and then the way that they've handled it now, I just don't think that it falls both under any legal scrutiny, but I think also, one of the things I didn't take seriously at the time was not only the due process position for any person in the United States, but it really does validate a lot of libertarian concerns about defending the principle, even whenever it's something that you matter the most, because it's obvious here now that this is just the way that the administration conducts itself, both on an immigration level, but also really across the board whenever it comes to tariffs, whenever it comes to so many of the different things, Signalgate, the sheer stupidity, the incompetence, and then also just asking people to defend something of which they themselves are admitting fault in a court, and then breaking it so that you have to completely debase yourself. So I know, I'm sure you wanted your gotcha, but you got me, all right?
I appreciate it.
Saagar's come around on this, and a very, very tiny part of me is mad at the Trump administration for what it did to its own supporters here, because it took the faith that its supporters had that Trump was going to be diligent and honest about. Now, he didn't betray me because I never felt like he would do that. But they really believed that, okay, he's going to go in and he's going to find 300 of the worst, and he's going to get them out of here. And instead, he swept up, at least it looks like more than 100 people who have no gang affiliation whatsoever. They're not even claiming they have gang affiliation. The country's focused on Abrego Garcia, but we reported on, what's his name, Sergio Reyes, who was a goalkeeper from Venezuela who had a another Real Madrid victim, had a Real Madrid tattoo, and they lock him up for that. Another one had a tattoo about autism awareness because he had an autistic brother. Then, of course, there's the makeup artist who clearly is not an MS-13 member, but maybe he had a tattoo. I forget why he wound up there. Just mistake after mistake, and using people's kind of earnest support for the Trump administration to marshal the Capitol to do that.
Yeah, I think Ryan is exactly right. And politically, I mean, I still think immigration is the strongest ground that the Trump administration falls on. And I think a lot of people are deluding themselves and thinking that this is going to be like dramatically unpopular. Most people don't watch the news or segments like this, and they're broadly just like, oh, he's a gang member. There's still a lot of trust in the Trump administration from the people who voted for Donald Trump. But at a serious level, I mean, I think all the concerns, not only about due process, but about the basic competence competence that an American can have in their government in executing a policy, which I do think was validated at a large level by the American electorate on terms of mass deportation. There was at least an assumption about some basic levels of competence. One of the major hits on the Biden administration was these are the most incompetent people who've ever run the government. Look at the state of the country. We're going to restore some sense of normalcy. And I just don't see that. You know, we've been some almost 90 days, 90 days now, right, in terms of the Trump administration, from the Doge cuts, which were supposed to be $2 trillion, now they're $1 trillion. It's like, it really does become an all-encompassing framework. And sure, you know, liberals can say, I told you so, but, you know, it's not like there's a lot of people who trust them per se. So sometimes you do need to see things. You need to see things for yourself. And I encourage people to think for themselves and to listen to people like you and to others and other debates, etc. So thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, man.